So my name is Jim Steyer, and I am a professor here at Stanford. I've been teaching here for more years than I would care to admit, but 35 years. But I teach politics and law. But my day job, I'm the founder and CEO of Common Sense Media. Today, however, I'm going to moderate a pretty incredible panel with two people who are two of the great experts on AI, education, the human side of all this. So you probably all know her, but on my far left, your right, is Candace Thille, who is a professor here at the Grad School of Education, really one of the pioneers in the field. We've known her at Common Sense because she helped us develop the rating system that we've now created for AI platforms and products. She has an extraordinarily distinguished career at Carnegie Mellon, et cetera, and it's great to have you up here, Candace. On her right, my left, Peter Norvig, another major figure in the field, now at Stanford as a distinguished education fellow here at the Institute for Human-Centered AI. So between Peter and Candace, we have pretty much of an all-star lineup here. I'm, of course, a Luddite, but I'm only asking questions. But even building off some of the stuff we heard in the last panel, okay? So the first thing I would like to ask you guys, and Candace, is when you heard the discussion we just heard, but you have been doing this for a long time, right? And I loved it that Amanda talked about how this is fundamentally how do we make lives of teachers better and students better. That's what we really care about. I love the fact that the university I've been teaching at and went to is such a leader here in AI. But if you could talk about one or two things where you said, this is a game changer. This is a game changer for how we teach and how young people learn. What would be the one or two things that would come to mind immediately? The ability to use AI to do what?
Okay. I've been doing talks about game changers of technology and education for 20 years. My big thing that I used to say was the killer app was the ability to push learning experiences to an interface so we could collect the data from the learner's actions, model those data, and get to learn where that learner is and where they need to go better. So that idea of collect the data from the learner's actions, model those data to make estimate about the learner's current state relative to their desired state, and then give that information to instructors or to the learners themselves so they could make good decisions about what to do next to move from their current state to their desired state. So that's the old power.
Right.
The new power, and what I learned from doing this for 20 years, is you give people that insight, but they don't necessarily know what to do next. And you turn to the science of learning, which is supposed to tell us definitively good things about instructional differentiation and how do you personalize and what's the next best thing to do for that learner. And all we get back at this point in time is, well, on average, the highest probability is that giving them a worked example to explain is better than giving them direct instruction with some questions to answer. Or giving them a mindset intervention is the best thing to do. But really, that question of what's the next best thing for that learner at this point in time, trying to learn this thing in this context, is a very complex decision. So for me, the power of the new technology is a big decision support system that can, you know how we've been saying you need to keep involving educators? Yeah. Well, part of it is educators have a lot of, they would call intuition or expertise, but what that's built up over is all the years of their observations. But their observations aren't captured in a knowledge base that everybody has access to. So that gets to the big power is the ability to collect all of those decisions, all of those professional and expert teachers are making in a moment-by-moment fashion, and having that be the knowledge base, and then the outcome, what happened. They made that decision. That was the outcome for that learner with this set of features in this context, learning this thing, and then we build the knowledge base. Someone said that ChatGPT is really bad at pedagogical decision making. That's because it doesn't have a database of good actions to draw from. And we need to collectively build that database and to build that knowledge base.
Okay, great answer. So Peter, just building off what Candace said.
Okay.
One or two game changers. Do you agree with Candace? And otherwise, one or two game changers that are upon us if we use it well.
Yeah, so Candace went back 20 years. I'm going to go back 40 years. Why not? And I'm surprised that we got all the way to 1130 and nobody so far has mentioned Benjamin Bloom's 1984 paper on Two Sigmas,
Yes.
in which he said if you do mastery learning, he also said tutoring, but really the mastery learning was the more important part. He said you'd make students 2 sigmas better. People tried to replicate it, said, sorry, it was really only 1. But the mastery learning is a great idea. And it goes against what we've been doing in schools, which is sorting people into the A's and B's and C's. Rather, we should say, let's make everybody be a master. And so I've been trying to address that over these decades. But I think the game changer now is we actually have something you can have a personal conversation with. It used to be we had to build things one step at a time. And as you're saying, you know, we can use, like Emma was talking about reinforcement learning, we can do that. We can make the students 5% better by saying this video is better than this question if you want them to solve this thing next. But we can't let them go off in any direction they want to go in. And now, well, we still can't quite do it because these language models hallucinate and they don't do the right thing and so on. But they're a lot closer now than they were 2 years ago. And they'll be a lot better next year. And I think in terms of game changers, we saw 2023 was the year of chatbots. I think 2024 is going to be the year of actions. Not just in education, but sort of across the board. Companies are trying to say, yeah, you can talk to this thing now, but you really want it now to do something for you.
Correct. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question. So we announced, without knowing exactly how we were going to do this, that we were going to, at Common Sense, because we're in the ratings business, that we were going to rate, Candace knows this, because we hired a couple of people who used to work for you at Google or Amazon or wherever, top people, to rate all the platforms and products. And we just announced that we did an agreement with Sam and OpenAI that we're going to rate all the GPTs, right? And we also announced that we were going to create AI, this is Common Sense, that we're going to create an AI literacy curriculum for every K through 12 classroom in the United States, because we already have that. We have a digital literacy curriculum in 80% of the classrooms. And so it's pretty easy to just build on that. And we're doing it with Sal Khan and Khan Academy. So here's my question, though. And we're doing that. And by the way, we would like any and all help from you guys in the audience afterwards. If you want to help on either an AI literacy curriculum or our ratings reviews, come and talk to me. Seriously, because we're going to really want to tap the Stanford brains and wisdom. But here's my question. I'm a former school teacher in Harlem in the South Bronx and East Oakland, right? And I'm trying to figure out what you just said, Candace, and what you just said, Peter. How are we going to educate teachers about, how are we going to make it a year of action, Peter, so that the average teacher over there in East Pali, where I used to be a volunteer teacher, who's dealing with all the different stuff that you're dealing in your 4th grade classroom, trying to keep that classroom together, trying to manage the different stuff maybe we'll talk about in the mental health stuff you in the last panel was talking about later in this discussion, but you're trying to do that. How is AI, though, number one, going to help me? And number two, how are we going to get that information and train that teacher, do the professional development, the basic learning for those teachers so that it really can turn into action? I'd love to hear both of you. How are we going to get this to the teachers out there in a usable, accessible way?
Sure, sorry.
Okay. So I guess the thing I've done most to try to help teachers is write textbooks that they can use in their class. And that's one example of a tool. One of the things I learned is you have to meet the teachers halfway.
Right.
Right? So at first I was thinking, I got to write the total state of the art, and anytime something changes, I got to update the textbook to do that. And then I realized, no, really where you want to be is halfway between what the state of the art is now and what it was when the professor was in graduate school, because that was the last time they were willing to accept change.
And we're going to quote him on that now historically.
Yeah. maybe
Yep.
not necessarily at a place like Stanford, but
Never at Stanford.
but
Never
at,
accepting Stanford. Okay.
right. And so I became aware that I have this responsibility to these readers, and there's sort of two levels of readers. There's the professors who are teaching the class, and then the students that are learning from it, and you have to meet them where they are. And so that's what we have to do with these tools now. It's not just make the best tool you can, but make the tool that is reachable to where the users are.
Okay, but how are you going to train the teachers? And my point is like, look, I'm a teacher. We got teachers in the audience here. How are you going to train the teachers with all these tools and in a way that they can manage it, adapt their teaching style, and still maintain order in a classroom with 27 kids?
Yeah, so as I said to you the first day we met,
Yep.
I don't do kids. So my area of research has always been adult learners.
Right.
So to speak
But you
to,
can extrapolate
But I
from
can
that. You can
extrapolate a
extrapolate from
bit.
that.
And I would say, so what I know is you have to start with the tools I think the earlier panel talked about this.
Yeah.
You have to start with what's the problem that's important to them to solve,
Yeah.
and work backwards from that. And then embed the ability to solve that problem in the work processes and tools they're already using. That's the only way to do it. You can't add one more thing on to a teacher's role. So, and you also have to, the other piece of that is you have to respect that they're just not passive users, but encourage them to be actively contributing to the knowledge base that's benefiting themselves and their colleagues.
But do you think it'll be easy to teach the average teacher? I mean, this is really easy for me to ask because I'm so dumb about this stuff, and I'm a teacher. I'm being serious. So if I was still teaching in East Pally like I was many years ago, and I was going to start using an AI tool or product that you guys are referring to, how am I going to learn that? How am I going to learn? How are you guys going to help us learn that? And people in the audience, seriously.
So I guess I've had it easier because
Yeah.
I've only worked in either in higher education or the workplace, where already the person who's in the role of supporting someone to learn something is already using a technology-mediated tool.
Right.
And the learners are already engaged with that technology-mediated tool. So the value to that instructor is I can give you insight and support to make the decisions that you're trying to make every moment. And that's harder. That's why I say it's harder for me talking about K-12
Yeah.
because you don't have all of the. I can't make a good estimate of the learner's state to give to the instructor so they can say, oh, that's where they are. So now I can make decisions and support me to make good decisions about what to help them to do next. So that, to me, a big part of the power, as I said 20 years ago, is that diagnostic ability. And in K-12, because I think that's true, right? Most kids aren't actively engaging with or are they actively engaging with these technologies in a way that we are collecting the data from their interactions, modeling those to give insight to the instructors, to answer the question that is on the instructor's mind.
Yeah.
I also, if I were a teacher, I'm not a K-12 teacher, I would be really skeptical about the research that's coming out of Stanford or coming out of other places that's telling me this is how learning works and this is what you as a teacher should do.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think we burned a lot of bridges with things like learning styles, where we came out and said, students have these 3 or 4 different learning styles, and it's your job as a teacher first to recognize, is that a kinesthetic learner, is that a visual learner, is that an auditory learner? Not only that, you have to be able to recognize it, but then you have to develop a particular way to personalize your instruction to meet that student's needs. And this whole industry
Yeah.
developed around trying to get teachers to teach to learning styles, and I think everybody in this room knows it's not a thing. So we created from our science all this extra work for teachers without it actually having an impact on what they care about, which is educating students.
So
better.
my then question is, okay, we don't want to make that mistake again. I think Mandy said in the last panel that we totally blew it on social media, which I, as the head of the biggest kids media group in the country, I completely agree with that. I do not want to blow it on AI's impact on kids in education.
Yeah.
And that, I'm trying to be really practical. I know that's a really intellectual, scholarly audience here, but I'm trying to get really practical about this. And Peter, my point is, this is the extraordinary potential, and Candace, I'll come back to the adult learners in a second, but extraordinary potential for personalized learning, right? but how on a mass scale, if that technology is that, and it's simple, easy to use, the kids can intuitively use it, it can take advantage of all the stuff you just said, okay, how are we going to educate the teaching workforce in the United States in the next year or two to use this, right? Otherwise, and by the way, I personally will say this, I do not trust Mark Zuckerberg or Evan Spiegel, my former student who I'm fond of, but I don't think he's going to figure out exactly how to use Snap AI to help you learn. So and I don't think Zuck is either. So I don't think the companies are going to answer. Some of the new ones may, but I think it's going to be people in this room and elsewhere. How are we going to teach the mass teachers to do this extraordinary new personalized learning, et cetera?
I think it's two parts. You do it quickly and slowly. So as Candace said, you do some things that say, here's something that takes away the hard part of your job. You can do it automatically. You don't have to learn a whole lot, and then you can focus more on the part you really want to focus on.
What stuff are they getting rid of? What are they taking?
So the grading of, for example, we can figure out here's an automated tool to do grading. You invest a couple minutes in learning it, and then you're all set. So I think that's great.
Yeah, lesson planning.
Lesson planning.
Yeah.
So much easier.
Item generation.
Yep.
Everyone knows it's best to have good, interesting tasks and questions to ask students to elicit their knowledge. And writing good questions is really hard for most people.
Then I think the harder part is we have to change the whole system to say it's going to be personalized.
Yep.
And not every student is going to be doing exactly the same thing at the same time. In John Seely Brown's latest book, he said, you try to personalize it and tell the kids the things that they're interested in. And he gave this example, there's a kid interested in basketball, so you ask him, if you make 17 out of 23 free throws, what's that percentage? And he says, that kid's not fooled. He knows that's a division problem. It's not a basketball problem. A basketball problem would be, how do you make more free throws? And some kid would look into the physics, and another would look into the physiology of muscles. And so they've completely blown up the curriculum, and everybody's doing something different, not just a different problem, but a completely different subject. And that's harder to do.
Yeah.
All right. So that involves really changing the way we do business. And that would involve more training on the parts of the teachers. I got to say one anecdote that I'm worried about. So we had a great program at Google to teach high school teachers how to teach computer science.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of great feedback from the teachers and principals. We also got some hate mail from the principals that said, I sent you my best teacher, and she got trained in computer science, and then she quit and got a job that paid 3 times as much. And that's a problem for society, not just for the schools.
So let me ask you a question. Since you're how are the Googles of the world going to be involved in this, right? Or Amazon, you were at Amazon, Candace. How are Google, Amazon, OpenAI going to be involved? Are they going to be driving some of the innovation, right, on this? Or are they just going to be providing the tools and the platforms that then really smart, caring educators are going to use? I'm really interested because we're sitting here in the center of Silicon Valley. This is going to be, you can see how this is going to play out, guys. This is what I have to do in my day job. You can see Microsoft/OpenAI are going to be huge players. You can see Google's going to be a huge player. Mark just announced, they're going to move from the metaverse to the AI world at Facebook. Oh, that'll be great. And then, maybe. But you're going to have these big companies playing, right? But they, to date, even though they've made extraordinary changes in all of our lives, including by building these great social media platforms that have had just perfect impact on our children's lives and our democracy and everything else. No, but how are we going to make sure, because AI to me is bigger than social media, right? So who's going to make sure on a practical level that this gets part of the education system, in effect that it makes the teaching profession more fun, and we can talk about other ways to reward teachers that we don't do, et cetera, but it's going to make it a more fun, rewarding, accessible. We're going to be able to measure student performance, make it personalized. How's that going to happen? I'm serious. That to me is the most important thing for everybody in this room to think about. Is because we sit in this extraordinary place, because we are, the home of Silicon Valley and these companies. And half of them, the reason I say it is, I see them as students here, and then we deal with them in my day job, and some of them are really amazing, but they are creating the platforms, guys. They are creating the GPTs. Some of the people in this audience are also building companies that'll help with that. But it's the nexus of how do you take that and then make it human and tie it to the teachers and the 5th grade teacher in East Palo Alto, the 7th grade teacher in Foster City or in Chattanooga. So how are we going to do that, right? So Candace, you go first.
Yeah, so is Brian Brown here? I don't know if you're here, Brian. And I asked that because I was meeting with a person who's a student in one of my classes who is doing a project, Brian, that I think touches on this question. And if I'm understanding it correctly, and correct me if I get it wrong, the idea is to get at the design process and to bring people who are in those platform and ed tech design roles at large companies and at smaller companies, bring them in to work with, facilitated by Stanford, bringing in educators, bringing in the designers, bringing in experts in different areas like equity and inclusion, with the intentional idea of how do we influence the design processes in these large corporations and small startups to be really being sort of equity forward and learning effectiveness forward. And not just be driven by what's going to get the biggest market share, what's going to get the, So I think, I don't know, who knows if it's going to work, but I think we need to, you're talking change management questions, and I don't know that there's an answer for what's going to work, but I think trying things like that, and have a lot of different things that we're trying like that is
well, the reason I said it is because I look at around this room, I don't know many of you, but I know some of you guys. And I really think because that Stanford is in this unique position, right? And I say that as a professor, as you may know, I teach politics and con law to undergrad. So not about this stuff. But you guys are education professors, and we have some of the most distinguished education professors in the world here. You also have all the technology people and the guys doing startups, right? So the issue to me is not just talking about all this theoretically. The reason I brought up the social media example was because 20 years after the launch of those platforms, how do we look at the impact they've had on my kids, your kids, our democracy, everything else? It's not a perfect record, that's for sure. So now we have AI, even more important. We're talking about it in terms of education. You have some of the most important educators, thinkers, scientists, et cetera, in this room, centered here in Palo Alto, basically. Okay, let's translate that into very specific stuff. So, Peter, you said I write textbooks, but you're not going to write textbooks about this, right? So what are we going to do to move this forward? And by the way, I'm asking it to them, but I'm asking it to all of you to think about this too. How are we going to change the world for kids? How are you going to really make sure that teaching improves in this country? We just did a poll of Americans about what they feel about the state of kids and families in America. Read the front page of the New York Times 2 days ago. They are really optimistic about certain things, but they're not optimistic about the education system. And they feel it has failed the public and in many cases their own kid. So to me, you have this massive new technology opportunity, but it has to be integrated with learning. So I'm asking this to you guys, but I'm really asking it to the two guests, which is, how are you going to then translate that quickly into specific, achievable gains on a mass scale? Not just so that the teachers at Pali High and Gunn know how to use it, or at Menlo and Crystal Springs to have the opportunity to use it, but the kids in East Pali or Modesto or whatever. How are we going to do that?
Yeah. We heard yesterday that the big tech CEOs got beat up by Congress.
Correct. And by me on TV, too, as the tobacco industry.
Yeah. And so I think they're going to be a little bit shy and probably aim more at providing tools rather than providing complete solutions.
Yep.
So it'll be up, as Candace said, to put together consortiums to figure out how to use these tools. And I'm not sure how much of it is going to come from within, say, the K-12 system and how much without. And it seems a lot of the experimentation is easier to do outside of the school system. And, you have a lot of companies that are trying to do both, Khan Academy, CK12, quill.org and so on. And it seems like they make faster progress, or they're able to do more experimentation outside of the school. And the stuff they're doing inside the school is more restricted. So I think we'll see experimentation, and hopefully we'll gravitate towards the stuff that works.
And Candace, do you think it'll change the way ed schools work?
Oh, yeah.
How? I mean, and quickly, or you think it'll take a 5 years?
I don't know, is the visionary
Dan's
still
over
here?
there. I sound like probably hated my asking that question. Sorry, Dan.
So I think Dan's a great model of a
Yeah.
dean of an ed school, because he is driving the ed school to
Yeah.
move in these directions, I think, much more quickly than a lot of other ed school deans.
See, but I think this is really, I'm speaking to you, if I'm speaking to you guys, they didn't know I was going to use the podium here like this. I mean that,
Yeah.
because this is the key, is we have an education system right now that's like a 19th century education system in many ways, right? And we've had technologies been promised to really have a transformational impact, right? And by the way, some of them, that's why I keep bringing up social media, it has had a transformational impact, but not necessarily in the ways we wanted it to do as parents or as citizens or other things. It's had a lot of benefits. So now AI, which all the technology people who I know, you guys are way more sophisticated than I am about this, say is a bigger deal than that, right? And it has this enormous educational potential, and we're having we have this new that Human AI Center here, you've got the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, it's like all this stuff, okay? Now let's practically turn that into massive change in the education system in the United States in the next 5 years. And the question is how do we get that? That's a question for you guys. How do we, that to me is the number one issue we all should deal with. How do we ensure that happens? How do we make it better to teach? How do we empower teachers? How do we empower students? All that stuff. So in a practical way, right? I know this wasn't exactly what we thought. What would you tell Dan about how Stanford might adjust it? I'm being serious, right? Or Carnegie Mellon, where you used to be, Candace. How should we change ed schools so that they are, particularly one like Stanford, where you're in the nexus of all this, so that you become cutting edge on not just thinking about this, doing the research and inventing stuff, but then mass scaling it with teachers and educators and school systems? How do we do that?
Well,
And in
Dan,
5 seconds.
and Dan knows this. I think we need a very different technical infrastructure.
What do you mean by that? That's important. What do you mean?
Oh, we need a technical infrastructure that does what I sort of opened up saying, that doesn't essentially pretend that we know exactly what the next best thing is to do for the learner, but counts on that everybody is making those decisions, learners and teachers, all the time, and collecting those decisions and the outcomes of those decisions, and the 3 domains of features about the learner, features about the thing being learned, and features about the context and the way those interact. And that's what the AI is going to help us do, is look at the patterns, managing that number of features in the speed that we need to manage.
And do you think that we can then communicate that to the average teacher?
We don't necessarily have to communicate that. It's like you can have, we have a medical school here too,
Yeah.
and we're doing cutting edge research
Yeah.
all the time
Yeah.
that makes the practice of medicine better,
Yeah.
including watching what happens in practice and using electronic medical health records to be able to refine and build a better knowledge base. If you use a similar idea, the individual teacher, unless they're really interested in it, doesn't have to know the depth of anything about the learning science to be able to effectively contribute to it
Okay.
and partake from it.
Yep, keep going there. Yep.
I think the medical example is a great cautionary tale, because that's also an area where we said, oh, we could start doing data science before there was generative AI. We're going to analyze the data. We're going to have much better models. We're going to make lots of breakthroughs. And that didn't really happen to the extent we hoped it would. And I think one of the reasons was regulation, that we decided we're going to have this HIPAA law that's really going to prioritize privacy. Privacy is important, but not being able to take anonymized data and learn from it was one of the casualties of that law. And so we need to make sure we have the right regulation in education so that doesn't happen to us.
Absolutely.
And then I also wanted to say, I think one of the problems, right, so we've talked about this, yeah, I can make you get the next question right
That's not what I said.
by having this data. That's one approach that
Yeah.
some people have taken.
Yeah.
We've heard earlier that, no, let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the whole process, and let's try to understand what's going on. And it's that understanding that's hard, right? So I've done some work with self-driving cars, and my motto is always, well, the first 1,000,000 miles are the hardest. So you got to drive 1,000,000 miles on the road, and once you do that, you know enough about how it works that you can then build a reliable simulator, and now you can drive 1,000,000,000 miles in the simulator. And you still got to keep driving on the road because really weird things happen, but most of it can be covered in the simulator. We don't have, and we are nowhere near having a simulator of a student, right? We have some idea of if you show them video A, are they going to do better on the next question? We have no idea of if they're in the classroom today, where are they going to be a year from now? And the only way we can get that data is to run live students for a year because we don't have any other models that can do that right. And if we can get there, that's when we'll get an explosion.
Can I respond to
Sure.
two things? Okay, great. So 2 things. First off, on your point about the data and data privacy, absolutely. And we need to be thinking more than just about data privacy. Before I left Stanford the first time, we were running a project, Mitchell Stevens, who's also in the Graduate School of Education, and John Mitchell, who's now at the Design School but was in CS. And I were working on a project that was bringing together researchers and legal people from all over, looking at the responsible use of learner data, which has 2 parts to it. It's both protecting those people whose data you're using from harm,
Right.
but also making the data as widely available for scientific discovery. And so we definitely need a new regulatory system for how you manage learning data
In the
and
context of AI?
experimentation. In the context
Okay,
of
so
AI.
let me make an offer to an audience. Some of you obviously know Common Sense Media. So we wrote the CCPA, the 2018 law, the law of the land in the United States, the California Consumer Privacy Act. We wrote that, passed it, et cetera, and then we ran the ballot initiative to do it, right? We also wrote SOPIPA, the Student Online Privacy, which I'm waiting to hear what you guys are going to say about that. But here's my question. So I run the organization that writes most of the laws here, and we also have offices in Brussels and London because Congress hasn't written a privacy law since Mark Zuckerberg was in kindergarten. And so you write them in California, and you write them in Europe and England, and that's how you regulate the companies. Are you guys, so this is a field I know something about. So are you guys saying that we basically have to rewrite the privacy laws as they would apply to AI? And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying if that's true, then I want to talk to whoever's interested in doing that, because we're running a big bill right now that hasn't been announced in California, because California is a functioning democracy, unlike Washington. And so you can pass laws here and they become the law of the land. So we're trying to write big AI guardrail laws right now in California. They'll get announced in the next couple of weeks. We're not trying to rewrite the privacy laws, though. But this is really interesting. But I'd be interested for the audience if you want to talk about it later, if people are interested in this. Are you saying we're going to have to sort of rewrite, because I understand the problems with HIPAA and the healthcare thing. Are you saying we're going to have to write sort of new privacy laws as they apply to AI and the use of anonymized data? Because that's a really interesting thing. As long as you can convince us that that's in the best interest of kids and education, and you're also balancing the important privacy interests at stake, that's really interesting, but it means there's another challenge that people in this room ought to take on. But are you guys saying that we're going to have to modify privacy laws?
Yes.
And how? At a high level?
Well,
how?
what we were focusing on were the rules that govern institutional review boards, that experimentation, those laws that were written for that don't fit the current context. But I think it is,
You're probably going to have to
I'm
rewrite.
not a legal scholar, so I don't know a lot about
We wrote SOPIPA in 2013.
Yeah.
It was poorly enforced and implemented, but it is the law of California and pretty much the law of the United States. And you could probably come after me and tell me it's ridiculous and poorly written, et cetera. But it's currently the law of the land. Your point is, though, we're going to have to modify this stuff for the AI era.
Well, I believe so, but
Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer, and I haven't read the law.
Yeah.
But I think what we need to make sure we're balancing, as Peter was saying about one of the reasons that medical science hasn't advanced is because
So many
we didn't
restrictions.
have access to all of these data. We couldn't use it for scientific discovery and advancement. So the privacy laws need to be protecting the individual, but also balancing that with the public good.
Okay, that's really important that people in this audience think about this, because then we should then they should be appropriately modified. I'm being serious. That's a huge deal, because what you don't want, by the way, it was really good that, I'm sorry to say, it's really good we wrote the CCPA and passed it over the objection of Google and Facebook and all the businesses that have an ad-based model, right? But then Microsoft, Apple, Salesforce, HP that aren't that, support us. That's the only way you pass a law where the industry's all involved. You have to split them into camps. But my question is, this is really important then, because I was going to ask you, you've worked at Google, right? For how long?
22 years.
Okay, we're good. So, because, you got to think what Sundar and Kent are going to say, right? Of course, they'll say we love children and education, Jim, you know that. And so, and they do, personally. But the question is, that's a fascinating thing. If we have to redo the privacy laws in order to get better education outcomes, that's worth it. To me, that's worth it, as long as you sort of balance the objective. Do you see that as being the case? So that's one question. Do you agree with Candace, Peter? But here's my second question, because you know the people. Do you think, well, I'll ask them myself, though, but do you think Sundar and James Manique and all the guys running all the AI stuff right now at Google, because they're the other really big player right now. They're going to have they're the biggest company in education, even though they don't acknowledge it very often, but they are. It's all the teachers use their platforms. So my question is, one, do you agree you're going to have to read out the platform size? But two, do you think companies like Google will really do this in a proactive, public interest kind of way, other than just trying to turn it into just another line item on the revenue chart?
So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert on the laws, and I think some of it may be just changing expectations and not requiring changing the laws. Because I think the medical laws were really much more restrictive. It's just so hard to share a medical record. With the students, it's like, we heard about the teachers helping teachers, teachers paying teachers, and so on. There's these repositories of stuff. I think you don't have to change the law to say, if a student wants to, they can publish their stuff. They can do a cool project and they can be proud of it and they can publish it, and a record of how they made it is now available to researchers, and we have to have the right kind of anonymization and so on. So, but just to change that expectation that that kind of material will become available rather than getting sequestered inside the school where it was done. And I'm not sure that you need to change laws, just change attitudes.
That's fair.
Also, the other complexity that gets introduced here with these very large data sets is anonymization isn't easy anymore. That's one of there are whole conferences that talk about that. But so just these things about anonymizing something isn't necessarily going to afford the protections you're trying to afford to the individual, or provide the access to the data that we need to do good science.
Okay, so look, I'm mindful of the fact that there's lunch and that we started a little late, but we're going to end. And I've always learned, cut it off early, don't go too long. So, and then you can have the extraordinary gourmet lunch that is planned for you, right? Okay. So, I have a final question for both of you, but I want everybody in the audience to think about this too, right? So when we have this conference 5 years from now, we're all going to be sitting here in the same room. Stanford will have won the Rose Bowl 3 times in a row. Niners will have 4 Super Bowl championships. And I'm still teaching at Stanford. We're still at Stanford, and we have this conference. And 5 years from now is and even though you're an expert on higher ed, Candace, I'm going to mostly focus on K through 12. Is the education system in the United States going to be significantly better 5 years from now because we successfully introduced and adopted AI technology and practices and products into the education system, and it's had a demonstrable, measurable impact on both student outcomes, teacher satisfaction, and the fundamental basis of our kids' lives, which is their education system. Where are we going to be in 5 years at a high level? Yes or no?
Yes.
It's going to be better.
I would say yes, we will be a lot better. And I think it is because we will realize an impact of the science of learning that currently isn't that isn't as developed as science as it will be in 5 years, and the results from that science will be immediately usable to support learners and teachers.
So 5 years now, significant change for the better.
Yeah.
That's great.
I say
What
yeah.
do you think?
I think 5 years there'll be change for the better. Significant change
Yeah.
will take longer, and it will require certain principles and so on to retire and be replaced by.
There are none of them in the audience, so it's not referring to any principals here.
Well, I guess that's a
Yeah.
question. Again, I don't do K-12, so maybe I am projecting onto a system that cannot change that fast. But it seems to me that what is needed to have that kind of change will be present, whether the political
Yeah.
structures can change that fast.
So what I would say to that is, that's up to us.
Yeah.
That's up to us. I think we should have a sense of urgency about that, right? I'm the father of 4. Many of you are parents. Many of you are educators. I think we should have a sense of urgency about that. Because right now, you cannot sit here and say that the American education system is doing well by our kids. Now, that's not about anybody in this room. You've all dedicated your lives to this. This is what I've done for however many years, and everybody else has here. But you can't say right now that we're really proud, and just go look at the poll Common Sense put out 2 days ago about what the public thinks about this, including young people who are also not very happy. So I think that's the question that we all ought to ask ourselves. We sit at the nexus of extraordinary education, extraordinary science and technology, some of the smartest, brilliant theorists in the world, so much smarter than I am, so I couldn't ask them questions about the stuff they do intellectually. But we sit here, I think, probably in a more central place than any place in the world because of the location, and the fact that we spawn Silicon Valley and so many of the companies, right? And the Sam Altmans and the Sundars and everybody else who's working on this. So we have a chance to make a huge change. And what I would tell you is 5 years, we better make some really big changes. And I hear what you say about systems. I'm an educator. I run a big child advocacy group. I have to deal with that. But I don't think we should accept that as an excuse. And I would end by saying, this does have that potential, but the turning of that potential into measurable, demonstrable changes and improvements in the lives of kids, students, teachers, families, that's what we all should focus on. And thank you very much for having me and letting me get on my soapbox and saying it. But thank you all, because it's on us to do it. Have a good lunch.